Okay, good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to figure out what the future is for smart buildings. So great to have you on board today or viewing us on YouTube. So if you're wondering who we are listed on mondaylive.org. It's a page with all our names on it. Just to point out that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And let's make this as interactive as possible and post comments and chat on the Zoom chat. And if you want any of the information that's on the slide deck, it's also available on mondaylive.org. So this being a new month of March, we're going to start a month where we're going to be talking about IoT, the Internet of Things. So we're going to sort of uncover what IoT it's all about when it comes to obviously buildings in our world of building automation. Really looking forward to that. A normal agenda, a normal chit chat, talk about IoT, and really we're going to start this week just sort of trying to understand what exactly do we mean when we say IoT in buildings. I'm sure there could be different sort of ways of thinking about that. I just want to get everybody aligned. I showed this last week. This is kind of the progression that we're in the middle of. Last month we were talking about operational technology, OT, and this month we're talking about IoT. This is going to lead us to next month when we're going to be talking about AI. So that's kind of the flow of the conversations as we're thinking about that. But before we dive into that, hand it over to Ken for an update. Ken, what's going on?
Okay, well, lots. It's International Women's Day is at March 8th. We've always been a big supporter of that event, and with our new folks in our industry, which are on the automated building site, which are all women, I'm sure that it's going to even be a bigger splash. Carrie has written inspiring inclusion post there, which is interesting. One thing she picked up on is her mom is the original gangster of work from home, starting in 1975, and she was raised in that environment. So that's kind of an interesting twist on it all. We've got some other good ones that are just waiting in the wings. We'll get online before the 8th. If anyone listening wants to contribute, just drop us an email, or if you're a contributing editor, contribute. We've been trying to define a little bit better what is automated buildings, because we've done this transition, and some of the traditionals think we are who we used to be, but we've done quite a radical change in our approach. And we are up the top there, it says we are the industry that provides the physical connections to the building using operational technology, and we need to simplify our message. Now, our original intent was to use automated buildings as that platform, as that online library, and have everyone add their little stories. So if you're looking at it as a website to promote your products, it's probably not where you want to be. If you're looking at it as a platform to sort of shift industry thought, then I think it is where we should be. So that's kind of interesting. We've been poking around. I try to keep in touch with global stuff. So this one caught my eye, Integrated Systems of Europe. Basically, they've been around for 20 years. And if you click on that, it shows you the stats of their last soiree in Barcelona. I think it's important that we kind of watch what's happening globally, because everything is coming together very quickly, and people are coming, and the IT stuff, which is our topic, it tends to be all pretty much the same. When we're talking IoT, we're talking cloud native, we're talking AI. What's being said globally is of extreme interest to us. So I think we need to kind of keep our minds open to that. this new new guide specification added by one of our advertisers is interesting to see that other folks are working on year 2525. And again, I think that's something automated buildings can help with, is to kind of bring all these platforms and events together. If it looks a little scattered, that's by design. The purpose of automated buildings is to kind of have everybody present their thoughts, and now better than just presenting their thoughts, they can actually show with videos whatever they need to use, the media of the moment, as we call it, and they can simply attach that. So that's our goal, and that's what we're shooting for. Let us know how we can do it better. Back to you.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks, Ken. So knowing that we're going to be talking about IoT, the way I think of IoT is before IoT, there was M2M, which is somewhat similar. And in fact, 20 years ago, this year, actually convened an M2M Expo and conference as part of BuildCon and M2M. So that's kind of what brought me back to that. And so I was kind of thinking, what's really the difference between M2M and IoT? Because kind of treated it as being just a name for something different, and came across this article which sort of thinks about it differently, which kind of makes sense. Their argument is the M2M is really skipping the user and going directly from a machine to compute, basically in the cloud or somewhere. Whereas the Internet of Things is that, but it's all sort of put through the internet as being the main communication channel, as opposed to just point to point. So I'm not 100% sure I totally buy this, but it is kind of a way of thinking about the difference, and it's also a way of actually thinking about the relationship. So for what it's worth, that's what I came up with.
It's a step in the right direction, in other words.
Yeah.
Too bad the 20-year step in the right direction.
Yeah. So interesting. Other than that, these are slides that we normally put up here, the video from the summit, and also we're still working with Wilcom and IBCon on exactly what the program will be in Tampa. We'll bring that to you as soon as we know it. And normal link slide. And before we jump into IoT, any other thoughts? Any other?
Yeah.
Bring up?
So Anto, with regard to M2M, I remember when at Tritium back in the, I don't know, 05, 06 era, when we were doing a summit and we highlighted M2M, it really was about going beyond HVAC and lighting to what today we think of more as IoT applications. So for example, we were highlighting hospital beds and how you could connect into a hospital bed to help know who's there and what the patient's conditions were. So it was really broadening the scope of what a building automation system could potentially reach in a facility beyond the top 2 or 3 things that we normally do. And it was very much device oriented, like beds and medical equipment. And now we've got, people tracking and elevators and other types of things that have become more IoT oriented. But that's really where M2M, at least from Tritium's perspective, was back in 04, 05.
It was also populated by a lot of the mobile companies. Nokia and Ericsson were very involved in that as vendors, and they were obviously interested to use their services of the technology, and the Verizons and AT&T were sniffing around, although their pricing model which just didn't work for M2M applications. But it had the sort of the nuggets of the start of what we're doing right now.
Right.
Any other perspective? Okay, so I guess we're back to IoT in buildings. What is it? Is it the same as OT we've been talking about last month? Is BAS part of IoT? I mean, these are kind of almost random questions. I could have put anything up there just to get the conversation going. I'm going to bring it down because it's not really, not sure it's that helpful.
All right.
So,
If nobody wants to jump in, I'll jump. So, personally, I don't see IoT as any different than OT. I think the reasons perhaps it's gotten market acceptability and interest is because it's intentional to separate it and make it sound different, make it, but fundamentally, it's an operational technology bucket of things to go do, which is, to me, is what OT is all about. So, and I would say that in an effort in characterizing it as such as something separate and unique, it's to, in part, it's because the architecture of the systems is current in terms of design, meaning it's almost designed from day one to go from a smart device right to the cloud. And arguably the technologies of traditional OT are still largely the last generation in terms of architecture, system architectures. So by declaring it IoT, it implies that it's, as I just said, it's device to cloud in terms of how it's been set to operate, and which I don't blame, those participants doing such a thing, because they don't want to be characterized as old school, if you will, in terms of their technology. But I think fundamentally it's solving a different problem? No. I mean, is it what you said earlier about M2M? It's extending what we do in a building beyond just HVAC and lighting. Yeah, absolutely. But when you're going to go beyond, nowadays, the way you architect it is you're going to use the latest technology, cloud native type technologies to design and build your system. You're not going to do it in a 2000 era architecture. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I see that in my mind, IoT is much closer coupled than we traditionally are. OT has always been working through control systems that were applied to technology solutions such as chillers and pumps and stuff. I see the IoT, the heat pump will be the greatest example of it, where we actually see it. It is the control system for the heat pump. It is the communication system, and it has been built on an IoT platform rather than some of the OT platforms that we normally support. And when we see people like Mitsubishi, who basically make both heat pump products and controls, you can kind of see a real tight meshing. And I think we haven't seen anything yet, because I think we're going to quickly see the IoT will quickly evolve to cloud native, and cloud native will quickly evolve to AI. And these are parts they need to sell their product. And when you walked around the show at Chicago, you saw a lot of folks marketing that. So I think what it means to the OT industry is a lot of new points are going to be falling on us for integration. Unfortunately, they're not likely to be BACnet or NAGRA. They're probably going to be more IoT standards. So that's my shot from the hip.
And I kind of go a little bit, but with what you said, Steve, and a little bit what Ken said. So I look at it, and I don't know this answer, but when we decided we were going to do this particular subject, I asked myself, and maybe everybody listening has their opinion, is IoT a tool or is it a medium? And I look at it as sort of both, in that, to Steve's point, it has enabled us to expand beyond HVAC lighting to all other types of stuff that are in a building, whether it be occupancy sensor, indoor air quality, whatever it is. You guys all know what that is. And it had introduced us to new ways of communicating, like MQTT, LoRaWAN, and all the others. And I think that part is the driver behind IoT that has enabled OT to get much more comprehensive, much more united and unified together, as IoT being a medium to make the broadest scope in and around OT. Also, I think, I look at it as this, the fact that we are able to go deeper and wider within a building. I don't think we were able to really do that with the more traditional things, whether it be Niagara, BACnet, lawn, whatever. So that to me has taken the fact that IoT we have it, we're using it, has pushed OT to beyond places where it traditionally has been.
So, are we sort of saying that there's a technology difference between IoT and, let's say, everything else for now? Is that kind of the essence?
When I look at it in its simplest form, risking being master of the obvious here, the biggest difference, I think, in terms of where we are in our evolution today, OT can refer to systems that are not necessarily connected to the internet, right?
Right.
As a generic term. IoT definitely implies or says this is a connected system. The other thing to consider, as IoT sort of started to come into our space, and it's to a certain degree still there, a lot of what at least some of us think of in terms of an IoT system in the building space tends to be little standalone application specific type solution platforms that sit out by themselves, aren't necessarily core to traditional applications like HVAC, lighting controls, things like that. But I think what I'm hearing everybody saying is the fact that all of those core applications are also getting connected to the internet now, that I hate to use the term convergence, but it is a type of a convergence here where all of this is starting to morph into something that looks the same across the board, right? Connected systems that we have access to that can provide more data, more reach, more remote access, and enables the next steps that Ken mentioned earlier, for instance, cloud native AI, that kind of stuff. So to me, it's very a directional indication of where everything is going. With some stops along.
Sorry.
No, that's it. I just said with some stops along the way.
Okay, sorry, I think there's another functionality that is driving IoT with OEM, and that's that IoT can, because it's so closely coupled, can actually prevent the product from hurting itself. If a temperature gets too high, it shuts it down. All of that is happening right inside. It's also sending messages back to the factory that we may have a warranty validation problem here before the guy actually even files it. So there's a whole level when you're actually, if you're making $250,000 chiller, then having that kind of connection is extremely important. Or in alternate terms, if you're supplying 2,000 heat pumps to a project, and, you know, they lose water circuit, like a water source or something, just to know all of that information. So all of a sudden, the manufacturers who have some skin in the game now want to use this product. The big advantage of that is if we can keep things open, which we always try and do, what it means to us is that we get a tremendous amount more information. And stuff like internal energy use of products and just skyrocketing all of the things that can kind of come out of it. And again, that morphs into cloud native and AI. So I think I think somebody said, you know, is it a tool or is it a link? It's a link, it's a medium to get to the future, I think. And it's also, it fits well with what's happening with Raspberry Pis and that have AI accelerators on them now. And so those products, we're going to start to see a whole new wave of products that are it's going to be just like you know, when we started using microprocessors, people built these things and they became so cost effective and so powerful that the OEM guys couldn't afford to buy conventional controls, so they put them in. This will be the same thing, except I do believe that revolution will be driven more by the OEM than us, by the OT industry. My own humble opinion.
So Ken, I hear you, and I appreciate all the feature functionality that you're ascribing to IoT devices and IoT systems. But my point being that it's the reason those features are there is because those products are taking advantage of the latest in software and hardware architectures. And that's the only reason that they're available now. Otherwise, you know, whether it's the internet, whether it's cloud native architectures, whether it's internet specific protocols, whether it's the cloud databases that allow for easy analysis of data, all of those things are indicative of the current state of the art in software and hardware technologies. And what concerns me for our industry is if we embrace this label of IoT, which stands for Internet of Things, and that was what Tracy's point was, the obvious is the word internet, right? Is if the rest of our industry in OT didn't even know it existed, right? So, which is clearly not the case. So my point earlier was that IoT, those who are using that term are trading on it successfully as a marketing vehicle to drive attraction to what it is they're selling. And I don't blame them for doing that. But from a buyer's perspective, my concern is that the buyer not think that there's some fundamental difference or reason why if they buy a system that describes itself as OT, that they're going to miss out on something. That's my concern, because now we're introducing two characterizations, and Fred Gordy contributed into the chat that the way NIST looks at anything connected to the internet, it's just a physical device that's doing something that gives you data to the internet, whether it's OT or IT, IoT, or an embedded device. So it doesn't care from that perspective. But my concern here is what I just said, which is we're trying to draw a distinction because we can, but ultimately, would be better if we could just agree on one phrase or one label to describe what it is we do, as opposed to trying to separate into these two buckets, and then it's just going to confuse owners. That's my concern.
I kind of think the the term IoT will disappear rapidly. I think it's a transitionary thing. It was 2 or 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it was a thing. But now that's going to be so deeply integrated into the products. So we're going to actually we're starting to see this now, that the products are coming with a a method of communicating which may be wireless, which is even another interesting thing. So, and again, I think we need to look outside of the North American market at the Asian market and see how they're pulling some of this stuff together. The other thing we're seeing, which is kind of affecting this, is we're seeing a large drive from central systems to, I guess I'd call them unitary systems, basically from massive chillers to multiple heat pumps. And that is changing the landscape of what we're OTing. So it could have been a boom if we could have sold a controller for every heat pump, but that's not happening. The heat pumps are coming with their own controls and
Right.
their own communication protocols. So there's a rapid change there. When you buy a heat pump product, I think you have to do the analysis as to how am I going to bring this into a system, or if in fact decentralization is even valid. If you look at a lot in the Asian market, they don't put as much value on bringing stuff together as we do. They tend to keep everything linked to a unitary kind of approach. Anyway, just there's some interesting dynamics going on there, but I think IoT is, it's just a way to get there.
And to me, the elephant in the room is interoperability. A lot of what hasn't been said here is that a lot of the IoT protocols and platforms that have been put forward are proprietary. In fact, a lot of the things that Ken just mentioned, the trend towards heat pumps, almost all of those heat pumps and VRV systems do not use open system technology and scale. And I often find IoT is a code word for proprietary, rather than open interoperable data definitions that we've been talking about on this call since its inception. And I think it's really important that there's no reason that has to be true. You know, these IoT systems can use established data definitions that would make them interoperable. Today, they generally don't.
So IoT doesn't stand for interoperable open technology?
Maybe it should just stand for interoperable operations technology. That's IoT.
If it had already been used for something else, that would be a great term for what we're trying to
Achieve, right?
move the industry towards.
Maybe that's the goal of the month, is to take the traditional meaning of IoT and turn it into something useful. Yeah.
So a lot of the people that have launched IoT products haven't actually had to operate at the scale that we need to operate at in these very large OT systems, so to speak. And I think that scalability will be very difficult to attain without a lot of the lessons that in this industry we've spent the last 30 years learning. Furthermore, you know, as Steve said, a lot of this has come along as a marketing term for people who didn't do their homework on the state of the art before they introduced their new products. That, coupled with a lot of people that are still going for proprietary locks. So I would say that people in the VRF business are largely very happy to keep their systems under proprietary lock and key.
So I'm just curious, Brian Turner posted something on chat, just says complexify. Are you making, what exactly do you mean, but just by that one word? Are you saying we're making it more complex, or are you wanting it to be more complex, or what's behind that comment, Brian? You can clarify, thanks. Sorry, Rick. Making it too hard.
I will, I'll jump in on this, the marketing value of Internet of Things, the internet, and the attractiveness that has for owners, and the sort of the meaning, and also then for potential employees for these companies, having worked for a fairly big, relatively successful Internet of Things company for a little while. When you say Internet of Things, that immediately says new, because, well, we all know, being even more obvious than Tracy, that the internet didn't exist in the 80s when we started doing OT, right? So So internet means a lot of things to different people, but some people it means TikTok, and it means browsers, and it means streaming sports. But for our industry, I think it means it has this illusion of being new, and therefore probably lower cost, using newer technologies. Usually Moore's law tells us that it probably means lower cost. And so there's a huge advantage of using the word internet in your marketing, because it just conveys the fact that this is probably new. It's probably not based on code written in the 80s. It's probably cheaper. And then it also, then the bad thing is, to Jim's point, it brings this illusion of the thought that it's going to be interoperable, because, well, if I can use a browser to get to everything on the internet, then my Internet of Things stuff obviously must be interoperable as well. And then they find out it's not. But the other point I wanted to make really quickly is that the M2M never was fully accomplished, and we'd used internet technologies to try and do some connectivity, but the next step of connectivity won't be using browsers and HTTP and, human-centered internet tools. It'll be machine-centered internet tools.
And I agree, Rick. I mean, if you look at when the internet impacted our industry, it was 25 years ago, right? BACnet IP, Lon came up with an IP tunneling technology. We've been using browsers extensively over that period of time, so we've heavily used the internet. But what we're headed for is this cloud native approach going forward, and that is new. So cloud native is new. Looking at a sensor over the internet, if that is IoT, that ain't new.
Right. And again, pointing towards the fact that cloud native is yet a step beyond the internet, as most people think about the internet being browsers and protocols from 25 years ago that, right, we started using. We benefited from the attractiveness of that term. And we also maybe suffered from some of the expectations of what people thought that internet was going to mean to interoperability, or for interoperability. Did Brian clarify complexify yet?
Yep.
Yeah, he did.
So where do we go from here? What do we do with this?
Well, I think for our purpose, for moving forward for the rest of the month, I think we want to agree on some terminology when we talk in terms of IoT and what we're referring to. So again, obvious, in this forum, when we talk about IoT in our applications, I think we mean very much commercial building oriented type of systems and solutions, not consumer IoT. And it implies a certain amount of connectivity. I think one of the things that we'll likely be exploring is the whole thing about interoperability and where are we and where does that leave us and so forth in our space here.
The other comment that Ron Bernstein put up in chat is the sort of the downside of this is that it makes summarizing his what he's saying, it's just adding a lot more stuff to the system. So that's not stuff that doesn't cost anything, especially with things like risks and cybersecurity and other things. So he's obviously right. Or is it a way of us being able to simplify things?
Okay, comment I'd like to add is on Jim's point there that IoT often ends up being proprietary. I think that's a very good point. And I know I was involved in a seminar somewhere, and folks from Bedrock in Detroit, when they ordered the heat pumps for their building, they actually went over to China or Korea, whatever it was, and they basically wanted to have access to that information, and they basically controlled the purchase until they got what they wanted, kind of thing. And I don't think it was BACnet, and I don't think it was Niagara. I think it was it MTT? Remember what that one is?
MQTT.
Thank you. I needed that. At some age in life, the acronyms start to blur. Especially when they're all new. Anyway, yeah, so I think that's what they agreed on. And so the products came with that and came with complete access to even stuff that they wouldn't normally have given, because the purchase of X amount of heat pumps was dependent on that happening. And also it wasn't very hard for the manufacturer to do. So maybe you need to shift this around and make it an action item for 25-25. That if people are providing or purchasing systems that say they have IoT in them, that there's some hooks and handles that we as OT can use. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, I was involved last year in a project where you could the system was providing a essentially a cybersecurity protection to PLCs in a wastewater application. And the goal was to take the data that was, and the whole thing was to restrict and prevent any kind of hacking into those PLCs. So that was the core reason for the purchase. But once that was in place, the owner said, well, now that all that data is ending up in a cloud, can I do something with it? I'd like to use it as my primary data source for day-to-day operations. And so the company I was involved with at the time said, sure, we have a visualization tool. We just need to be able to connect to the data. And it turned out it was really just, in software terms, a REST API that we were able to quickly create a driver for. So was it BACnet? No. Was it the data actually coming from the site was coming over Modbus because it was a PLC. But once the data got to the cloud, it was no longer in Modbus. It was in a cloud database. So at that point, it was really okay. Now we need to have a higher level interface to capture that same data, and so that, to your point, Ken, we need to look at what are the technologies at cloud to cloud that are going to be straightforward, if you will, easily supported by all of us in this industry. And it's not clear to me that that something like BACnet would be a preferable option at that level in the architecture. And so I think we need to have some conversations around that.
I think you brought up an excellent point, Steve, on the ability of cloud native to separate and delineate from traditional IoT is really significant, because originally they were very reluctant as an OEM to give me access to their little card device that controlled their heat pump, because I could reverse it and break it, kind of thing. And they were concerned about that. But if we pull the data, if they give us a cloud native, looks like a small digital twin of it, and I've got everything I want, and I can interoperate with it without actually physically being able to do harm to the device. So I think cloud native is the hamburger helper for IoT that is really radical. And then I think that piece has to fit. Once we start doing that, then I think AI obviously plays very well in the cloud native field. And we're going to start to see some real changes there. Maybe.
My problem with these easy APIs and code pieces, where one could take what's there and translate it into another form. Problem with scalability over that for a long time is, in our industry, these systems have to run for 30 years. And typically in an IT system, they only have to run for 3 years. So if I'm shredding that technology, throwing it out and starting it again, that's fine. Problem is if that little piece of wedge code, which goes from whatever proprietary technology was there to whatever's in the cloud, when the guy that wrote that code is gone, somebody else has to reinvent it from the ground up. And that's one of the reasons that one argues for using standards for data definitions and technology at that level. Therefore, hopefully automatic tools can do that translation or self-discovery rather than having somebody rewrite that code every 3 years as the technology moves forward.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Anto, I think it would be helpful for you to maybe to weigh in on whether in the IBB architecture, you know, we had introduced the connection profile concept, and is that in your mind the appropriate answer for cloud to cloud communications as well as what would be resident in the IBB if in this case there isn't one in the building?
Yeah, I think ultimately that's the right direction. What's being said is that IoT is inherently cloud native.
Right.
Right. So we're saying these things, some of these things that are, some things are just, we know are not cloud native. BACnet MSTP, we know, don't even think about it, right?
Right.
Because it's just not there. BACnet SC, on the other hand, we know is cloud native.
Mhm.
Right? The IBB was designed to cloud native. So there are certain things along the way that is cloud native, and cloud native then becomes the way, the common thing amongst all of these technologies. And we know the reason for that is cloud native allows sort of interoperability. It's certainly a new kind of interoperability that is what we're talking about. I think that's the way I would actually think about it.
Mhm.
But
But
I think
are you suggesting that there's multiple methods that we need to be able to support in the cloud native world? Not, in other words, the BACnet SC would be one methodology that you could support and thereby get the data, and something like connection profiles would be another method?
Yes, because something like connection profile is really as much of an orchestration layer as it is a data transportation layer, right?
Okay.
So it's all about, and a lot of cloud native is about orchestration. Kubernetes is about orchestration. So orchestration is about knowing where everything is and being able to connect them together. So
Right.
a lot of cloud native is actually orchestration. So the connection profile mechanism is an orchestration layer that would definitely help the connecting systems together, regardless where they are in the cloud native world. So I think that's the way to think about it.
is there any way we can kind of bring up some preliminary documentation to outline best practices and understand that this isn't really something you can give a flat spec on, but at least something to keep your head up on when you're putting these systems together, like write a paragraph or something. Maybe Rick could write that, or something that would be good for.
So in the 2525 framework,
yes,
in the updated one, the version 1.1 that was released in Chicago, there is actually two such new sections, one on cloud native and the impact on cloud native on 2525, the second one specifically on IBB. So you're right, Ken, it should have been written. It was.
Can we pull some of that out? I wasn't even aware of that. Can we pull some of that out and share it with the world? That would probably be pretty useful and shed some light on it.
It's actually in
you guys put a tremendous effort into 2525, and I think it's still hiding in the closet. You got to take it out.
Yeah. You're not going to get get an argument on that from me. Yes, we need to promote it.
Where did Rick go? We need to get Rick back on the screen here.
The introduction section of the Div 2525, which is, I think it's about much shorter, about 10 pages, that has in these two new pieces in it.
Yeah.
So we should promote.
Good to know
So,
that.
Anto, what I'd like to see us do the rest of this, at least some of the rest of the month. I'd like us to look at 2 or 3 real world IoT examples. And here's the product. Here's what we know about how it's architected, and here's here's if from an interoperability standpoint, what are the options that product offers the marketplace today. And so, we're talking a lot of theory right now, and I think it would be great if we could make it real and actually show some specific IoT systems and how they're architected, and then how that contrasts to what we do today on the more traditional OT world.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I think that should be a really good way of spending this month.
Yeah.
Digging into specific angles of IoT, as it were.
I think one of the things that we need to address is Jim's comment about code for proprietary, and how do we create a framework to move forward and start to provide mechanisms to integrate those systems in, right? Part of the challenge that we have is proprietary often, not always, but often equals innovation also. So we can't just say, oh, we're not interested in anything that's proprietary. We should also include a mechanism to be inclusive of some of that stuff too, as well as best practices for open architecture.
The best way I believe to think about that is again, coming back to the IBB. The IBB is centered around 2 things. It's centered around containerization, right? Which is actually a brilliant way of containing proprietary stuff, right? There's nothing stopping anyone from creating proprietary code that goes inside a container, and it will remain proprietary because you can't poke into it. What you have to make interoperable are the interfaces between those systems with other systems. As long as you do those 2, you can be proprietary inside and interoperable and open on the interface, and you're good. And I'm not sure why that. I mean, there's a lot in that, right? Because we're protecting proprietary stuff all the time, and we think that proprietary is therefore open, and therefore the 2 are fighting.
Yeah, we're not talking about open source code here.
Right.
To be specific, there's nothing wrong with proprietary code, but to your point, it's the interface that's the question mark. And by looking at some existing products out there, and maybe Ken, if that heat pump example would be a good one to look at. But obviously there's others, and then we should evaluate in each case what the interfaces are being offered today, and so we again make this real, and that will help guide us in whether it's a 2525 spec which is really what we're trying to do, is provide guidance to our owners. If you're going to buy this technology, buyer beware, right? Because the future is about interoperability. That's our theme, and it really is. You're assuming because you bought something that's connected to the internet, therefore I should be able to work with it, right? And that's what we want to nail down. Is that a true statement or not?
I think it's not just data definitions, protocols, BACnet, but also metadata with Haystack and other elements.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of people that have designed these products designed them in a vacuum or over periods of time where they weren't aware of that market call. So I think it's incumbent upon owners to demand open system technology, things like Haystack, BACnet, and other things, and that'll get things going.
But also thinking about marketing, we were chatting about marketing earlier. I remember back in the 90s, 25 plus years ago, I remember looking at, I read a lot of IT journals, InfoWorld and the likes. And I was always astonished at how many companies were highly promoting the fact that their product is proprietary. This product is proprietary, so you should buy it, whatever it is. And I've always sort of felt that was really strange because I was in the industry that was trying to sell open all the time. And so the reason I bring this up is that there's actually a way of actually us sort of reframing this, of actually saying proprietary is good. Proprietary, because proprietary is a way of actually surfacing innovation and surfacing new stuff. Right. So this is actually a way of creating and distributing proprietary technology safely, because the interfaces are always open. And therefore, it can be used. It's much easier to use and much easier to control, because we have the architecture of the IBB to actually control the proprietariness that's actually the container. So there's sort of a marketing angle to that I'm not sure whether we can tap into or not. Does that resonate at all?
Yeah. Mhm.
David, you've been very quiet.
Yes. It's interesting because one of the questions that came through was, is this just another way to bifurcate or, you know, subdivide and create yet another methodology outside of IoT and OT? And I remember when a lot of things came out, and, you know, in the 2010s, and IoT was a big thing then, and the cellular providers were looking to, you know, like GE and AT&T were doing the smart light pole thing and all of that. And at the end of the day, what does Internet of Things mean? It really comes down to semantics. How are we defining it? And when I think in the 2010s was really when the evolution of the industry changed from MSTP, RS-485 type networks that are all individual and locked in and will work for years, to having this IP network that could join all of these different systems together. And the transformation that I saw in the last decade was having a converged IP network for OT, for building systems, where all of these systems could coexist on a shared IP network. And I think that type of application of the term Internet of Things is very much in line with the direction we're going with the IBB, and having everything on a shared network in a building to exchange data. And I think devices, there was this also concept of Internet of Things where it's these distributed things like the light poles, and it's communicating over cellular to the cloud, and then you get your data back down. But when we really look at real estate asset management and portfolio management, these are pretty much wired networks, sometimes wireless networks, but still IP and still within the jurisdiction of a single building. And I think that really the direction that the industry needs to go is to have everything on an IP network that allows this exchange of data. So I think as long as we're going towards that direction of a shared converged IP network with open data exchange that the IBB can sit as in and amongst of and help empower, and then having cloud applications that can take things even further, I think that's the direction we're going. At least that's my hot take for this afternoon.
So in that kind of description, that everything's IP, all of the networking is IP, right? And there is an argument that when you go further south to that IP layer, there's non-IP stuff, right? That's kind of there. I mean, ultimately,
Sorry to cut
ultimately
across.
a sensor.
Yeah, sorry to cut across, like, if you have a BMS, like, let's say you have a bunch of VAVs that just have a damper, absolutely have that on an MSTP network with a processor or DCC unit or DDC, sorry. But yeah, there can certainly be sub-networks, but ultimately that processor or brain of the system needs to be able to surface
Feed it up.
that data from those edge devices and sensors. Because it doesn't make sense. I mean, this goes back to working on the Bloomberg Center with Cornell. You know, if something's going to be like a few kilobits of data a day, it doesn't justify a port on a switch. It's just a waste of resources and an inefficient use of networking resources as well.
So what do you refer to those? Just as sub-networks?
Yeah,
Or
I
is
mean,
that just-
however, yeah, I mean, there are lots of things like shade control where it just makes too much sense to daisy chain those together and have a controller per facade per floor or something like that. It doesn't make sense to have all of those, you know, motor controllers on the IP network. It's a waste of switch ports. So it really, you know, the topologies will vary by system. And, you know, normally when I was architecting integrated buildings, we would have a processor per floor per system. So a main lighting control processor, a main shade control processor. Normally there would be numerous AV processors, and then there could be a BMS processor per floor. All depends on the architecture and the preferences. But basically, you just being able to zone, you still need to be able to control any system by zone or space or room was really what it needs to boil down to.
Okay. It's just coming up to 4 o'clock. Need to start to wind this down. Anybody want to do a brief recap?
I thought what David said was pretty good.
Okay, so we've done a recap. Right, we'll continue this IoT theme for the rest of this month. We've got, I think, 3 more weeks, and I think we've got enough sort of range of stuff that we can talk about. So good conversation today. Thank you all for being here. Thanks the attendees for being here, and we'll get the video up tomorrow, and hope everybody has a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks all.